Song of Drums and Tomahawks, Fast Play Skirmish Rules for the French and Indian War, and more by Ganesha Games, available at www.ganeshagames.net. Now, this supplement to A Song of Blades and Heroes is by First Command Wargames, and I can already hear the comments. I already hear what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Wargaming, what are you doing buying yet another supplement for Song of Blades and Heroes? Aren't you one of those guys that criticizes the RPG supplement treadmill? And the answer is kind of complex. I mean, first of all, how dare you? How dare you question? Don't you know I'm Mr. Wargaming? Second of all, I'm just kidding. And third of all, boy, there's a lot of alls here. Third of all, Mike DeMana is the guy behind this. Written and edited by Mike DeMana, Mike Seltzer, and Keith Finn. Mike DeMana is a stalwart over at the Lead Adventure Forum, one of those few internet forums that has survived the explosion of social media. Really well-run outfit. I check it almost every day. There's not a whole lot of threads that I'm really particularly interested in. 98% of it is just outside of my bailiwick, if you will, but man, that 2%, it's so great to have. And you can probably go find a lot of threads on this particular game itself. So a lot of respect. Big shout out to Mike DeMana. I actually bought this kind of to support him and just to say, hey guys, if we are truly a hobby, then we need to take care of the other hobbyists. I don't think he's like a big multi-million-dollar mover and shaker in the industry. But fourth of all, this kind of thing is really good, and I'm really satisfied with this purchase because it provides a number of things. First of all, the historical background is tight. Talks about the European arrival. Now, the game itself really kicks off with the European arrival, but this is a very neutral history. It acknowledges that the Native Americans were at war long before the Europeans showed up, and probably would have been at war long after they had left, departed for back for Europe, if that had been the case. So really fair, really even-handed. I really appreciate that in my histories, particularly in these days when so many people are trying to rewrite that history and trying to paint one side or the other as the bad guys. Very neutral, very fact-based, and really just solid work all around. And I'm not going to get this kind of information. Like, what am I going to do? I'm going to go to Wikipedia? I don't think so. So really solid background, and it really kind of lays out the historical era and who was fighting whom. And the answer is everybody was fighting everybody, right? The French were fighting the British, were fighting the Indians, were fighting the French, were fighting the Indians. The Spanish got involved. Even in the early days, the Dutch were involved. And I have another supplement for this on the Pequot War. I don't know if I'm going to be able to use that. It's a campaign using these rules. I don't know if I have enough figures. I'm a little light on the Native Americans, and I don't have the Dutch figures that I would have to do a lot of proxying. And I'm not sure I want to do that in a historical game. However, as we continue, it's got some really good line art, really just action-packed, and here's a little map of the eastern seaboard, and it talks about which tribes are here. Shout out to my homies there, the Potawatomi tribe. I grew up learning about animals at the Potawatomi Zoo. Great place. And then it just kind of goes down. Now, this is, of course, a bit of a snapshot. I don't know what year this takes place because there was a lot of movement in these tribes. Some of these tribes were successful and shoved other tribes out of the way, and they moved around. But it's a good kind of overview, right? The Seminoles were kind of down here, but in the history, it talks about how a lot of the Seminoles were actually members of the Creek tribe that got shoved out and kind of came down here and were unconquered. One of the few tribes that basically just signed peace treaties. They rebelled against the American government, particularly it's about a good 100 years after these rules, but they fought for the Confederacy. They fought so that indeed the lone holdouts, and just the thing is, proper respect to these guys. They were a warrior culture. They fought the good fight for a good long while. And there's some really good, look at these black and white photos here, right? Mike's doing something right. Look at that. I can't match that on my table. But we can still have some fun with this rule set. Now, the other thing is, and here's the big thing. So, yeah, this historical background, you could probably just poke around on the internet and say, oh, yeah, I read about it on Wikipedia. Okay. But this also gives you some really good flavor rules. And I'm not going to go through the whole rules. You guys know how to play Song of Blades and Heroes. I've got 30 videos up on that. We've played it in everything from modern day to fantasy and Napoleonics And now we're going to go back to some like I said, some early American frontier. There's some good cliff pictures there, right? We got some. These guys look good. Who are these by? Conquest Miniatures. I wonder if they're still available. Obviously, 28 millimeter. Again, I'm going to be playing this in 15 millimeter. My figures come from a mix. I've got some colonial era British figures. I may have to press some of my Vendée farmers into service as coeur de bois. For the French, I do have from Irregular Miniatures a number of Native American figures, and I even have a couple of for like frontiersmen, Davy Crockett types. But the big reason that I bought this is that there are a number of period-specific rules that will really help you dial this in and give you the feeling for the kind of warfare that was fought. And, in addition to the weapons, right, the technology of the day is kind of important. So we all know what the range long, medium, short is. It includes things like matchlock and blunderbuss. Remember, pretty impressive. This set of rules covers like 200 years of progress. So we may play a game that takes place in 1630 in which we're dealing with matchlocks, right? Some +1 at short range. And then maybe you'd say, okay, well, let's go to the War of 1812. And then you've got mostly muskets with maybe even a few rifles. And so here we've got the difference. The range is long band, right? And we got +2 at short, +1 or +2, and then +1, +0, depending on which weapon you are. But take a look at this. So the key thing here is that musket, rifle, pistol, matchlock, blunderbuss, all these things take 2 actions to reload. This is similar to what we saw in the Napoleonics. You cannot fire and reload in the same turn. So even if you get 3 actions, you spend 2 to reload, find something else to do, bro, because you're not shooting this turn, okay? Likewise, if I fire this turn and I still have 2 actions, I ain't reloading. And you have to spend those 2 actions in the same turn. Very similar, right? But then we get this thing. This tomahawk here is very interesting. First of all, before we talk about that, the bow, you don't have to reload that, right? It doesn't have great accuracy, but it's got a longer range than tomahawk. Tomahawk can only fire 1 medium, but the bow doesn't need to be reloaded. You can still only fire it once per turn, but you can move twice, shoot. You can move, shoot, move. So you can jump out, and then jump back into cover, right? So it has its own abilities. It has its own power. And in fact, it may be, I'm not sure, but you could probably make a case for hidden figures firing a bow and not revealing their position, depending on the scenario. Hidden figures, very important, because most of our terrain here is going to be at least medium cover, all of the light forests of the eastern seaboard. But like I said, the tomahawk, I want to key in on this because the tomahawk is one of those rare weapons that allow you to make 2 attacks on the same turn. Normally you might think, well, geez, it's got no range. It's just kind of a weaker, it's just kind of a normal melee weapon. Why would I even take a tomahawk? And the answer is because Mike is a clever guy. He says, look, if you have a tomahawk, that's a second action. So what you can do as a figure is you can throw the tomahawk and then move into combat and fight melee. Alternatively, if you want, you can fight a melee, and if your opponent recoils, you can make a missile fire attack with that tomahawk. That's interesting. That gives this thing a whole lot more use. Now, it is a one-time use item. You may have to spend an action to recover it, but that's the kind of period-specific flavor that I'm looking for in a supplement like this. The other concept that I want to talk about is kind of a sensitive one, scalping. Mike takes the fairly neutral position that scalping is a thing that Native Americans did before the European settlers arrived. When the European settlers arrived, they took advantage of it, and it wound up, much like beaver trapping, hey, that's a pretty good idea. Let's give them money for that. And then you get a whole lot more of it. So there's a little bit of like, both sidisms going on here, where the practice wasn't as widespread at the time of the settlers, but it became more widespread because of the settlers. That's just the historical background. The real thing I wanted to talk about is this is the kind of period-specific flavor that I'm not going to be able to come up with on my own. And where is it here? There we go, scalping. And so the way scalping works, you can purchase Scalp Hungry, basically, a scalper. And that is to -2 points. But your guy, your figure, when it puts an enemy figure out of action, you have to drop a little marker down. So we're successful. We shot at the guy with our bow and arrow, and he died. This figure, he has to pass an immediate quality check. And if he fails, then every action he takes subsequent to that has to be in pursuit of taking the scalp. So that may be, if he fired it at medium range, right, 2 range bands, he has to make 1 action, then 2 actions to get there, and then a 3rd action to collect the scalp. Once he's done that, you might want to do that anyway, right? There may be victory points. Maybe your victory conditions are take a certain number of scalps. But if you have the scalping, like, what would you call it? It's the, what's the language they use for that? It's the skill or the trait, I guess you could call it. Yeah, that's what they call it, the trait. Then you have to, bear in mind, we all know how the activation economy works here. I may activate I don't want him running out into the open. This guy fell in a cornfield, right? I don't want him running out in the open until it's completely safe. So I'm going to activate everybody else first. And then this will be the last guy I activate, hoping that I fail one of those activations and he can just stand there. Now, of course, given the way the action economy works in this game, that means I've effectively neutralized him. But I may need to keep him alive in order to stay above that 50% threshold for morale, let's say. So this is a really interesting concept with some very interesting game ramifications. And I'm very eager to get this on the table and explore how it works. So that's the second thing that's important. And the third thing is, how do I organize? Now, again, right, the book says the game works best with about 7 to 8 figures. Very helpful. That is perfectly in line with my experience with the Song of game. It starts to break down at about 12 to 15, depending on like what kind of leadership you're using. But the game does have, right, this is not a complete like sugar-coated here. Nowhere does it give you an idea of how big a typical game is. 7 guys, like I don't know how many points that is. Now it does give you, example figures, right? And this is one of the things that is useful. It says, look, most people that are fighting on the frontier, whether they're Native Americans or Europeans, most people are going to be a combat of 2. They're going to be about a quality of 4, right? Half the time they're gonna nope on out. Half the time they'll do what you want. Half the time they won't. And that's pretty standard across the board. So start with that. And then your big dang heroes are probably going to have just a +1 to that. So maybe a 3. So here we go. French line infantry, right? These guys are going to have a lot more quality. Well, like I said, quality 4 combat 2. So this is your standard. Your NCO is going to be, quality 3 combat 4. Corps de Bois, same thing. Where they really start to shine is with the skills, right? The Corps de Bois, courier, I thought it was Queer. I thought it was like the heart. Is it? Cool. I'll have to look that up. Anyway, that's my own problem, not yours. So a leader, right? It's going to be quality 3, combat 3, and then they even give you a couple of personalities in here. So for example, Simon Kenton was one of the big American heroes. Quality 3, combat 3. Here's one you might have heard of. Guy by the name of Davy Crockett. Quality 3, combat 3. But he's hero, right? And we all know what the hero trait does for you. He's got rifle, he's got marksman, and then he gets an additional +1 to combat using his favorite rifle. So that's kind of, Cornstalk was, here we go, 1720 to 77. He was a Shawnee chief that fought actively against the British encroachment of the Ohio Territory. Leader, musket, tomahawk, marksman, woodsman, scalper, right? Quality 3, combat 3. So these are your big heroes, is combat 3, quality 3. They really start to shine when you slather them with excess numbers of traits. Or I should say extra, not necessarily excess. But this is the kind of thing that really provides some help and some guidance for a neophyte like me, young Indian archer, quality 5, combat 1, right? And again, you could probably suss out, right? If we're going to do a tribal chieftain, that's 100 points. And then if we're just going to do, 5 Indian warriors, so that gives you your 6 figures. You're looking at about 250 points. That's about right. Indian Braves are 36, so maybe you get like 5 of those, and you're up to about 300 points. And then a matching force would probably, for the British, it would look like, hey, what if we go with just an NCO, caught unawares, so that's 72. And we got 230 points left over, so what is he bossing around? Maybe some line infantry. So he's going to have like 8 or 9. But again, the points are not the only way you balance a scenario. It's the initial setup and the special rules. And so that's where I may have to kind of dive into some of these links that are included on this first page, firstcommandwargames.com, and really download a number of scenarios. Now, I'm not going to talk about this today, other than to briefly mention, I did pick up a copy of the Pequot War, For Song of Drums and Tomahawks by Mike Stelzer. Wait a minute. I thought I got this because it's, yeah, Mike Stelzer. Look at that. And then it does include information presented by, if we open this up a little further, additional special rules and editing by Mike Damana. Again, First Command War Games, one of these little hobby shops. You'll love to see it. See, look at these guys. Look at these guys. These guys look like they could have stepped straight out of the English Civil War, right? And they probably did. They were probably on the losing side and got kicked out of old Great Britain and had to run off to the frontiers and fight against old Pequot. So we'll take a look at that probably in a future episode. But like I said, I got to count up my figures and see if I even have enough to make this work. A lot of these scenarios call for they're a little bigger. Remember I said, 6 to 7 is perfect. Well, look, Pequot here is the chieftain, and he's got 10 warriors. So we're up to 11 already. All right, and then here we've got 14 for the New England militia. So we'll have to kind of figure out how we're going to do that. And in fact, look at this, the Narragansett warriors. So this is early enough. This is, do we get the year here? Yeah, so we're in the 1600s. And all of my British are more like late. They're really more like 1750s. So I don't know. I don't feel comfortable. Maybe if I can get the right figures for it, maybe we'll do this in a few years. But that's going to have to wait on a lot of things. So right now I'm kind of hurting for scenarios. I'll poke around the internet, see what I can find, and we'll try to get this on the table as soon as possible. I know we're long on pen and paper wargaming these days, but we're fully committed, right? This is miniature war games are what we do. So we're going to try to get more of those on the table in the coming weeks. Until then, I thank you for your patience, and I'm praying for you.